In today's beginner series Affinity tutorial, we're talking about layers. Now this is going to be one of the longer videos in this series because layers are such a crucial part of your workflow in a program like Affinity. So much of what you do is going to flow through that layers panel. So if you're coming over from a program like Canva, you probably have a basic concept of layers and how that layer stacking order is important to see one layer appear in front of another layer. But there's so many more advanced concepts. Clipping layers, blending modes, advanced blending sliders, being able to do non-destructive edits because of the adjustment layers, the adjustment filters, layer effects, we can all apply it to the layer. There really is so much going on in layers, and all of this is fundamental if you really want to become an efficient user in Affinity. So let's get right into it. Okay, let's start with some basics. I have this photo of a tiger here on screen, so I just went to File, Open, and brought this open here in Affinity. Now, when we're working inside of Affinity, where do we get to our layers and see our layers anyways? Well, by default, you're going to see this Layers panel over here on the right. And right now it's just docked over here. And even if you switch between different workspaces, usually it's going to be over there. But if for some reason you didn't see it, let me just come back to pixel mode here. You can just click these three dots and you can bring up this menu here. Now, of course, if you watched my prior lesson on the user interface, you know this because you can come under panels, you can scroll down. This is in alphabetical order. And then here's layers here. You see I can turn that layers panel off. I can turn it back on. Now, I think this is one of those panels that almost all the time you're going to want this turned on. But you don't have to keep it over here if you don't want to. You can drag it, you can move it around. So I'm just going to click on it. I'm going to bring it out. I could actually have it real big floating over here since we're going to be working on layers. That might make sense. But let me show you something. Here's a quick trick, your first layers trick you're going to learn. If you just double click on the layer thumbnail, it's actually resizing to make that fit the workspace here. Now you didn't see anything happen, but what if I went down here to my navigator and I made this really big and then suddenly I double click? You'll see that resize to fit the workspace. But because I have this panel floating, it's hiding some of it behind the panel. Now, this is one of the instances where maybe you might want to choose a docked panel versus having a floating panel, because let me show you what happens if I take this here and I just slide it over until my cursor is right over the line here. I see this blue sort of highlight, and then boom, I release it. Now I have this layer docked. Now you'll notice when I come over here and I resize this to whatever, if I want to sort of zoom to fit, that's where I can do that double click trick where I just double click on the layer. It's going to resize it to my active workspace. And your active workspace is going to sort of include everything in between your docked panels on the left and your docked panels on the right. That's why, a floating panel, it's great. It works sometimes, but other times because of this trick and because of this reason, you might want to just go ahead and dock your panel. So I'm going to leave layers docked over here and we're going to make it nice and big since we're going to be talking all about layers in this lesson. Let me just get my cursor right in between there. It's a little finicky. Oops. See, if you lose it like that, if I double click, it'll also reposition it. I was just trying to grab this handle here, and there we go. Make it a little bit bigger like that, then double click, boom, we have everything set up the way we want. Now by default, when you open a photo here in Affinity, it's going to put it on a layer and it's going to name that background. However, there is a difference between background layers in Canva and Photoshop and here in Affinity. So in Canva, if you have a background layer, it's stuck being the bottommost layer in your project. You can't change that. And in Photoshop, you can change that, but by default, it comes in locked. Well, it doesn't come in locked here. There is really no difference between this layer and any other pixel layer here inside of Affinity. It just calls it background by default, but don't let that confuse you. It doesn't change how you can work with that layer. So if I were to just come over here, grab the rectangle tool and drag a rectangle, that's going to be on a new layer, but I can very easily just drag it behind my background layer. So this background layer is not locked. You can work with it just like you work with any other layer. Now, anytime you have a tool panel here inside of Affinity, you're also going to have some options for that panel that you can access with that little triangle in the upper right of the panel. So if I pull this down here, I can see that I can come in here and change it from having thumbnails to no thumbnails. I can make it medium. I can make those large. So it's not making a big difference here, but it's making a slight difference. So I think I'm going to switch that to large just to help my old eyes a little bit. But you can make any adjustments you want. And there are a few other options in here. You can sort of change what the background color of the thumbnail is. I don't think any of these make a huge difference, but you can come in here and make any adjustments you want. So I'm going to leave it like that with the large version of the thumbnails. But since this is pretty small and I like to stay organized, it's also good practice to name your layers. So you can name any layer sort of by double clicking here on the name. You can also just click once, it'll turn blue. The whole layer is active now. And then if you click a second time, it's going to make it so you can come in here and update the text. So I'll just call this one Tiger. So give your layers whatever names makes sense. That way you can look over here, and even if you can't really see the thumbnail too well, it's just going to give you an idea of what's on that layer. Now each layer is also going to have an opacity setting, and since this Tiger layer is currently 100% opaque here, I am not seeing through to the rectangle below because there are no areas of transparency here on this layer. Obviously I could switch the layer order here, and so now since the tiger is on bottom, I'm going to see that white rectangle. And since this white rectangle is only taking up part of the design here and then has transparency everywhere else, I can see through to much of my tiger. So just be aware of that, and that is how this layer stacking order becomes important, because obviously as you move things up and down, you're going to control what you can see through to. So if you sort of think about layers of transparent paper, some of those are going to have drawings that might only cover part of the layer. Other things like this tiger might have a drawing across the whole thing. So it's going to become really important stacking order. And then also you can come in here and independently adjust the transparency across everything that happens to be on that layer. So I could lower this down and suddenly we start to see through to that rectangle. But when I bring it all the way back up and make this 100% opaque again, then we're no longer seeing through. So just pay attention, because this stacking order is going to matter greatly when it comes to how things work in your design. Now we can make this a little bit more obvious just by dragging this rectangle back on top. And I'm going to come over here, I'm going to grab a different tool. Let's get the ellipse tool here. I'll give it a different color, and let's go ahead and turn this stroke off for now. And I'm just going to drag out another shape on screen here. So now with two different shapes in two different layers here, we can a little easier demonstrate how important the layer stacking order is going to be. So let me just grab the move tool here. And so then if I move the rectangle here, we see it starts to cover over and obscure that circle below, and that's because it is the top layer. Now, you can change layer order here just by clicking on one, dragging it down below. So wait till I see that blue line below the circle and then release, and now with the circle on top, now we see we switched that up and now the circle is on top. Now, let me show you something here. What if I were to drag this down and I release it not below, but when I'm on the rectangle? Well, then what happens there? We got something funny going on here, because now suddenly the circle seems to only show up and is contained by the rectangle here. And what we just did when you're moving a layer around like this, if you drop a layer on top of another layer, you actually create something that's called a clipping mask. And if I go up and study this layer closely now, it's a little tough to see because the icons are so small, but we see we have this little arrow here on the rectangle layer, and we can actually twirl that closed, and we see these layers are actually grouped below, and the rectangle layer is the topmost layer. So it is acting as sort of like a container, a mask that is controlling what we see on this layer below it. So if we move this circle outside of that container, it's hidden. We cannot see anything because it only shows on areas of the screen where this rectangle shape exists. Now, I can undo that at any time just by dragging the circle and dragging it up out. And so now they're just separate layers again. We see that little twirl down arrow is gone, and we no longer have that clipping mask. But let's just take this circle here, and I'm gonna make it a little bit bigger. I'll hold down my shift key to constrain proportions. I'm going to put it right over the tiger's face here. But what if I were to grab the tiger now and just drag that tiger right onto the circle? Again, when we do that, the circle is acting as a clipping mask, and it is clipping the shape below. Now I'm going to hit Control Z to undo that for just a second so we can see another way you can do this. Also, if you just put the tiger layer below the circle, anytime you have a layer that's above another layer, and then you right click here, you're going to get this drop down menu here, and you can find this create clipping mask option. So if you have a layer above another layer, you can use that layer to clip the layer below it by right clicking on the layer and coming down and choosing create clipping mask. But I'm going to hit Control Z to undo that, because an even easier way to do that is whatever layer you want to act as a clipping mask, just take the layer you want to be clipped and drag it right up there and just drop it right on that layer. So now we're grouped together, and now this tiger layer is being clipped by that circle shape. Now, even though they're grouped together and it's being clipped like this, I can come down and I can click directly on the tiger layer, and I can still use my move tool and drag it down independently to sort of control what I'm seeing through there. So all these different tools, all these different ways we can get layers to interact together. And this is starting to get into the concept of masking, which we're going to go over even more in another exercise and another lesson. But for today, we're just talking about clipping mask, how you can use one layer and the visibility of pixels on that layer to control and constrain what shows through for a different layer. Okay, so I will go ahead now and just drag this tiger down a little bit so we see that blue line. Now I've released that, so now they're back on separate layers. And we see that this has gotten moved a little bit, so if I just double click to sort of center it in the screen again, I'll just bring it back and have it again snap to the edges of my document like that. But let's bring the rectangle back up top. And so we saw how layers get sort of grouped together when you do a clipping mask, except the visibility of one layer really goes away completely. Like that green circle, we weren't seeing any green anymore. Those pixels were just determining what's going to show from the other layer. Now, of course, you can group objects together and preserve them as they are. So if I were to click this one here, this layer here, this rectangle layer, and then shift click to also select this circle layer, then with both of these selected, I could right click and I could come down and I could find this group option. And we also see it's Control G here on my keyboard. Now that's on Windows. If you're a Mac, I suspect that's Command G, but you also have keyboard shortcuts. And then when you group them together, we can see once again we have this twirl icon, but they're no longer clipping each other. They're just grouped together now. If we twirl this open, we're going to see both layers are within this group. We could come up here, again, use our ability to name things, and maybe I'll call this shapes. And so any shapes I might bring onto the screen, I could put into this layer. And so then once I have them in a layer like that grouped together, then I can move them around together. If I just select one of them, they're both selected. I can move them around. If there's certain things I want to do with these together, if I want to resize them uniformly together, I can do that now because they're grouped. Now, if you ever want to get rid of the group here, you could drag them out like we did before. Also, you can just right click and choose ungroup or Control Shift G. So they're always keyboard shortcuts for a lot of these things just to make things a little bit more easy. And then once you've done that, of course, then you can, let me undo that. Then you can come click on these and you can move these around independently. Now I could still click one, shift click to select the other and move them around together because I've selected them both on screen, but they're no longer explicitly grouped together. If I click off and click back on one, just that one's going to be selected. But grouping is a good way to do things together with different layers and also just to stay organized. We only have 3 layers in this project right now, so really not a big deal, but imagine if we had lots and lots of layers. We could suddenly select a bunch of them, create a group, and then suddenly twirls down into one neat nested category, and that makes it a little easier. We can still twirl it open if we want to see all those layers, but it can just help you stay a little bit more organized. Okay, let's keep going, because believe it or not, we're just getting started and we haven't even really gotten to the good stuff yet. So I'm going to go ahead on this layer and right click, and I'll go ahead and ungroup this layer. Now let me show you some things about working with layers here, selecting layers, and also some different keyboard shortcuts you can use. Now first of all, if I wanted to select all of these layers, I could click on the topmost layer, and then I could hold down the shift key and I could click on the bottommost layer, and it's going to select the first layer I clicked on, and then that last layer and everything in between. Since the rectangle layer was in between, it selected all those. Now if I wanted to select just 2 of these, I could click out here on the name part of the circle, and then I could control click out here on the name part of the tiger. Now the reason why I said on the name part is because if you use that control keyboard shortcut and you hold it down and you click on any layer, you're actually creating an active selection. See the way we have these marching ants now around the tiger? And if I control click on my rectangle here, you see again an active selection here. and if I control click on my circle, see, I've loaded an active selection. So that's important to know because that control keyboard modifier can work in different ways depending on where you're clicking here on the icon versus over on the layer name itself. And they're both helpful. You just have to understand there is a difference. So it's the difference between just making a layer active like we are here and then actually making an active selection where we control click and then we're actually loading a selection here. So this is actually something crucial to understand. The difference between just having an active selection here on screen and your active layer over here. Because what I did was I control clicked on this rectangle icon to load that as a selection. So I used the rectangle shape to create the selection on screen. However, my active layer is the tiger layer. So if I were to just come under the edit menu now and choose copy, I could also use my Control C keyboard shortcut. And then if I use my Control V keyboard shortcut to paste something, so Control V, what's going to happen? Well, we see a new layer got created here. It looks like maybe it's just the white rectangle, except remember, this is hidden behind everything. So if I drag this up to the top, what did we actually do? Well, let me hit Control D to deselect. And now if I just grab my move tool, I actually cut out an area from that tiger layer. Now remember, I didn't actually cut it out, I copied it because I hit Control C, which is copy. So if we just turn off the rectangle, we see it still exists there, but I created another copy of those pixels, which now exist on their own layer, and I can move that all around. And that's because I was using this shape to make an active selection, but then my active layer was the tiger layer. So in other words, if I took my circle layer here, let's just move it right over the tiger's face. I'm going to use that to make my selection. So I'm going to hit Control C on the circle, but now I could turn that off. I could come up down to my tiger layer here, and now I could actually hit the Control X, which is actually to cut something out. So Control X, and I've cut out that tiger layer. And then if I want to paste it down, Control V to paste it down, Control D to turn off my active selection. These are all keyboard shortcuts you can learn. And then this tiger layer, these pixels, they are now on a separate layer. Okay, so understanding, when you have a selection on screen, when you see that dotted outline, that shows you the area of the screen where you're going to perform an operation, but then you have to still be paying attention to over here what the active layer is, because when you perform your next action, it's going to affect any pixels in that selected area on your active layer. Okay, so make sure you understand this crucial distinction. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just hit Control Z a bunch of times here, and Control Z is just the undo command. So it might become your most used command, so Control Z just lets you step backwards versus keystrokes to undo things you've just done. So there we go. I'm going to go ahead and throw out these two shapes, and now we're going to be down just to our tiger layer. Now, let's go on to discussing even more. So let's go ahead and let's bring another photo into this same design. Now, the easiest way to do that is coming up here under the File menu and choosing this Place command. Now, when you bring in a new photo, you're going to bring it in as either embedded or linked. That's going to be a topic for another lesson. It is important, but we're not going to go over that right now. What I'm going to do is grab this texture layer. We're going to go ahead and open it up. And when you first go to place something, you're going to see this little icon right here. And that means it wants you now to click, hold your left mouse button, and drag out the area on your screen where you want your photo to be placed. So you can make this a small area, you can cover the whole photo. You're basically creating a container that's going to hold this new image. So I'm going to click right here, I'm going to drag out, and it's going to get constrained here by the proportions of the image. So I can make it small like this, I can drag it out, but it's keeping those proportions. So I'm going to drag it all the way out here, and then when you have it where you want, you can release it. And now we have this photo here within this design. Well, I actually want to expand it out to cover the whole image here. Now, you wouldn't necessarily warp proportions like this if it was a photo, but with something like a texture, I know I can get away with it. So I'm going to grab this bottom icon here, this sort of control handle here, and drag it out. But when we do that, you see the whole thing scales. I just want to scale out this one side. So I'm going to hold down the Shift key. That's going to let me just pull this side. I'm going to go ahead and pull it down. Now we have it fitting perfectly over this photo, and I can turn this on and off. Now, why am I setting up this way? Because now I'm going to introduce you to blending modes. If you're a Photoshop user, you're probably familiar with blending modes. Great, you're ahead of the curve. If you're a Canva user, you may have some experience with blending modes because there is a little sort of Canva app that lets you do blending. but it's way better if you do it inside of a program like Affinity or Photoshop. You just have way more control, way more non-destructive control. So what am I talking about? So what are blending modes? You'll notice anytime you have a layer selected here, right here, you have this bar up here in this drop-down menu, and by default, it's going to say normal. However, when you choose other options here, you can pull down different presets for how these pixels are going to interact with the pixels below. And so these are all running off mathematical equations. And so sometimes it might say show through the bottom image if it has darker pixels. So it's sort of matching up pixels on the different layers and applying some different preset. You know, maybe it's going to show the brighter pictures. Maybe it's going to show the darker pixels. Maybe it's going to use one layer to control the color values on another layer. There are lots of different options here. The best way to start to get familiar with them is just playing around. But so I can hold down this drop down, just release my mouse button, and now I can sort of just scroll through and see on the fly all these different active presets, and you have some really cool options. This is a way to get some really cool looks. So I really kind of like this overlay one, so boom, I can select that, and now I have this layer in overlay mode. Now, if you've ever done this in the Canva app, you apply it once, it flattens everything into a JPEG. You can't reposition your texture, you can't switch to something different, you're stuck with it. It's finalized. The great thing about working in a program like Affinity or Photoshop is the ability to do non-destructive editing. So edits where you can still come back later and turn things off and make changes because nothing you've done here is permanent. That is what is great about working non-destructively when you're doing photo editing. You can see there are lots and lots of options here, but I think I decided I like this overlay mode, so let's set it back to overlay. Now, what else can we do here? Well, even though this blending mode is being applied, it's going to actively be applied even when we move this top layer around. So we can change and look at different areas of texture behind this tiger. Now, because this photo is the same size currently as my background, that might not make a lot of sense. Well, maybe let's go ahead and bring a circle in here. So I'm going to go down here and bring in a circle shape. So let me just grab this ellipse tool. I'll hold down shift. I'll drag out a circle like we did before. And once again, like we did before, I'm going to use this as a clipping mask, but I'm going to use it as a clipping mask on a group here. So we're going to start to stack the different skills we've learned together. So I'm going to select this texture layer, the tiger layer. I'll hit Control G to group those. Now I'm going to drag that group right up onto the circle, and boom, I've made this clipping layer. Okay, but now I can still go down and independently move the group layer. So I'm going to go down into the group. Let's grab the tiger because I want him to be centered on my screen here. So I'm going to go ahead and bring him up here, put him like right there. And then the texture layer, I can still come in and independently move that around. Find an area of that texture that I really like behind the tiger, maybe something like that. So now we're starting to stack together the skills we've learned, and we're starting to see how we have lots and lots of control and lots of options here within Affinity when we talk about working with layers, the ability to add blending modes, and lots of stuff we haven't even gotten to. Okay, so what are we going to do next? Well, I like what we've done here, but I don't like just having a transparent area here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come on this texture layer. I will right click and I'm going to duplicate this layer. So now I have another copy of that layer. Now it's still being affected by the overlay blending mode because it's still within the group here, but let me drag it outside of the group here. So all the way to the bottom, I'm going to let it appear behind everything. So boom, now I have it down on its own layer. I'm going to go ahead and reposition it right here. So now we have this texture layer up here within this group where it's being affected by that clipping mask, but then I also have it independently here on another layer. Now I'm thinking I kind of want this circle group to be in the exact center of the page. And I can just click on the group itself and I can start to drag it around, but it's not explicitly snapping to that exact center. There's some snapping settings you can toggle around to full width here. And in Canva, you may be familiar where you have those smart guides where sometimes it'll snap nicely to the page. But in Canva, you're also probably familiar, you have those different alignment options. Well, what if I select this group here, which represents the whole page, and then the circle group, which I want to align to the center of that whole page. So remember, select one and then control click to select the other. And I accidentally did what I told you not to do. I clicked on the icon itself instead of the name. So let's try that again. Let's click here, control click on the layer name itself up here. So now I have these both selected. Now there are menu items where I could come up here under layer, I could find arrange, and I could find align, and I could find center and then middle, and I could do it that way, but that's kind of cumbersome. I'd rather just have simple buttons where I could do this easily. I want those buttons to always be visible in my interface. Well, if you watched the last tutorial in this series, then you already know how to do that, but I'm going to walk you through it here. So what I could do is I could use this one right here to bring up the panels. So again, I'm using this top icon here. You could also use this button here just to get in under panels here and get in under this menu. Then remember, it's this top toolbar where I can drag out more commands up here. And look, here's one right here, a line that looks like it has what I need. So I'm going to plop that right up there. I'll close out of this. I have these things both selected here. Let me make sure one, control click to make sure the other is selected. Now I'm just going to use my alignment buttons right here. Boom, boom, very simple. Now I've got that here inside this interface. And if you watched that last video, you also know about setting up studios, saving your presets and your settings and your tools and your toolbar look just the way you like it. Okay, so very easily starting to stack together what we're learning. Now I have that exactly centered in my design. Okay, so what else can we do to layers? Well, let me come up to this tiger layer, and then anytime you have the layers panel open here, you'll notice at the bottom of the layer, you have more symbols and options down here. And this first one that looks like an FX, it's kind of hard to see, but if you hover over it, it'll say layer effects. If you bring that up, you're going to bring up this layer effects panel, which allows you to apply different specific layer effects to any layer in your project. Now I can then use these checkboxes to turn any of these layers on. However, just like when we were working with layers up here, you got to pay attention to what the blue active layer is, because that's the settings panel you're going to see. So even though I've turned on outlines, if I want to see those settings, I actually got to click on it here. Now I'm seeing these outline options for adding an outline effect to this tiger layer. Now what's going to happen here when I drag around the slider? Do you know what's going to happen here? Remember how we have our document set up here in terms of layers and this group here. So right now it says I have a radius of 3.6 pixels. Let's just make that much bigger. Let's drag it up to something big like 40 pixels. Well, I'm still not seeing anything. Well, here's a clue. Look at this blue bounding box. That goes all the way up here, and that is something that is outside of our group here. So even though I'm applying an effect to this tiger layer, I'm applying an outline which is going to affect the outer bounds of that layer. So because of our group here, I'm not going to see it. Now we can see that it is working. If I were to turn that off and I would just temporarily drag this tiger up above the group, we can see, yes, I do have that black border effect around that layer, but we're not seeing it because it is hidden within this group. Now let me bring it back in the group here because I do want it within this group here. Now I'm going to go ahead and turn that effect off. Now a clue that you have at least one effect applied is going to be anytime you see this FX symbol on a layer, you have applied one of these layer effects. And if you want to see which one, you can just click on it right here. It's going to bring that menu back up. Anything you have checked is something that is turned on. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to turn that off, because what I want to do instead is I'm going to go apply a layer effect to the group itself. So you can apply a layer effects to individual layers, but also just to group layers. So I'm going to come in under this group layer, I'll hit the effects menu, and then I'll go to outline, and now we'll drag that outline up, and we'll see that now we're getting the outline effect around this circle as we intended. So this is layer effects. I'm not going to go through all the options in here, but you can play around some pretty cool layer effects that you can instantly add to any layer. And again, these are non-destructive. You can turn them on and off. You can come back in and make adjustments anytime you want. Just click on this little FX icon if you see it. If you don't see it, you don't have any layer effects applied to that layer. Now, if I were to resize this circle that is my clipping mask group here, if I were to just resize it up and down, we would notice that that border effect that we've applied, that outline, it's maintaining a uniform width. So whatever number of pixels I set up, it's going to be that, whether it takes up the whole screen, whether it takes up half the screen, the quarter of the screen. However, there are times when maybe you want that effect to scale based on the size of your overall group or layer. And you can do that by coming in here under the effects menu again, and you have this scale with object option in the bottom left. And now we'll notice if I come back here and I scale up and down, now we'll notice that that border is getting smaller as the object gets smaller. As the object gets bigger, then we're seeing that border grow and get bigger with it. So just another feature to be aware of. You have that scale option in the bottom left of that effects menu right down here in the corner. Okay, let's move on and look at the next option down here at the bottom of the layers menu, because we just looked at layer effects. Now we're going to look at this mask layer option. So we've already learned about clipping mask, and with a clipping mask you're using the pixels or the shape on one layer to sort of clip the layer below it. Now with a layer mask down here, it's the same idea. Instead of using a shape or a particular layer, you're actually going to start with a selection. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to make a duplicate of this tiger layer. So I'll make a new version of that. We're going to drag that down outside of the group there. I'll go ahead and close that group, and we'll turn off the group. And so here we go. And I'll go ahead and reposition this guy so he's just directly over my canvas. Now, same idea. We're going to clip this layer, we're going to mask some of the pixels away, but instead of starting with a shape, I am just going to draw a selection. So you can use any of the selection tools. I'm just going to go up here and find this lasso tool right here. So the freehand selection tool, it's called the lasso tool in some programs, so I always call it the lasso tool, but the freehand selection tool, and just come in here, I'm going to draw sort of this crazy shape. I'm just going to go around here making a basic rectangular frame, but with some of these cool curves and shapes. I'm going to do something like that, and then I'll come down here, tiger layer selected. I'm going to come down, find this layer mask or mask layer button, I should say, click on that, and boom, look at that. So Control D to deselect, and just like that, very cool, we're able to clip this layer based on the selection. So we started with a selection, but we can see what we did here is it actually created a layer mask. So if I twirl that open, we can see the mask itself. Now, if you just click on the layer and you click on the mask, you're not going to see the mask, but if you hold down the Alt key on your keyboard, that's on Windows, this would be Option on Mac, and then you click on the layer, then you're actually going to see it. Then you're actually going to see that this is a layer with white, and then there's some black. And that's based on the selection that we drew. This white area is everything that I selected. Now, the whole key to a layer mask is anything that's white, you'll see all the pixels completely. They'll be 100% opaque. Anything that is black is going to be 100% transparent. You're going to see through. You're not going to see any of that. And shades of gray in between, you're going to be pixels that you partially see. So something that is 50% gray in here, you would sort of see that layer 50%, and then the layer below it would show through 50%. So you'd have a pixel that has partial transparency. Now, we alt click so we can see this mask, but anytime you just click out of it, it's going to disappear. It's still there. It's still working and affecting the layer, but we're just not seeing it unless we use that alt click to jump on that layer and see that mask. Now, we can do some really cool things though, because we know how a mask works. We know the properties now where white shows through, black doesn't show through, shades of gray are going to partially show through. So if I were to come in here now, and I'm going to come right on the mask itself, so I'm going to alt click to get on the mask here, and then if I were to come up here under my pixel menu, go under filters, choose this blur and choose a Gaussian blur, I can actually apply a blur directly to this mask layer. So let's style it all the way up. I'm going to go ahead and hit apply, and then remember when I click off of this, this is just sort of the underlying layer that's affecting what shows on this tiger layer. So as soon as I click off of this, we're going to see the tiger layer, but we see how that mask is affecting it, and by adding that Gaussian blur on there, we've come in there and we sort of blended this seamlessly. Now, the problem with the way I did it right there, coming up here and using this option here, is that I did it in a destructive manner. Where I apply that change, it's applied on the mask. I don't have one of those adjustment layers like we did before, and that's sort of something we've partially talked about, but not completely. I can't go in there and make changes. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to undo that by hitting Control Z. Let's see if we can approach this problem in a different way so that we can actually apply that same change where we want to blend the edge of this layer, but let's try to do it in a non-destructive way, because anytime you can work in a non-destructive way where you can step in later and still make changes, that is a good thing. So instead of applying a filter from a menu up here, what we're going to do is go down and find this next option down here on the layers panel called filters, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to twirl that open, and we're going to choose this Gaussian blur. And when you add a filter in this way, you are adding it in a non-destructive fashion, meaning you can come in here, you can make changes to the filter, but then you can always undo those changes, you can change those settings, you can get rid of it altogether. And so when you add a filter like this, it's going to get placed here in your layer stack, and anything below this filter is going to get affected by the filter. So because this filter now exists as a layer above my tiger layer, and everything in that tiger layer group, which is the mask currently. And above my background, both of those are being affected by this Gaussian blur. However, if I drag it down and I release it once I'm all the way below that tiger group, and so just above the background, now I can release it and it's no longer affecting the tiger, but it is affecting the background. So where you place a filter like this is going to be super important, but also you can come in here, you can turn it off. You can come in here, you can still go get back in and change the settings and adjust how much of that filter is being applied. So applying a filter like this in a non-destructive way makes a lot of sense. Now, remember, we want to apply it to sort of this mask layer. Well, what happens if I put it in the tiger group right above the mask there? Well, let's see. It's getting applied, but it's affecting the whole tiger layer. It's blurring it. It's not doing that feather like we wanted to do before. That's when we were able to alt-click on the mask. So let me hit Control D to undo that. I accidentally selected that. If I alt-click on this mask, so Alt button, not the Control button, we can see the masks now. We can see that there is no filter applied at the edge of this. Before, when we directly ran a filter, we directly ran it on our mask. So is there a way to get this Gaussian blur filter to act like that? That's what we want. Well, yes, there is. Instead of having it above the layer here, what if I just drag it right on top of the layer and release it? Look at how it's working on that layer now. It's doing the same thing as we intended it to do before, and we see that it is now grouped with this mask layer. So we just dragged it right on top. Basically, the mask is acting sort of like a clipping layer on this, but we're getting that soft edge, and we can now apply this blur and get that effect we did before, only now we've done it in a non-destructive way. So if we want to come back and adjust this later, it makes a lot of sense. Now, I'm not going to go over all the different filter options in this menu here because that's a different lesson, but just know applying filters like this using the layers menu, that's how you apply filters in a non-destructive way. Now, just like we have these filter layers, you also have some adjustment layers here. So under the adjustments, we have things like exposure. So if I were to drag an exposure layer up, it's going to do the same sort of thing where it's above everything now. So if I come in here and make adjustments, let's up the exposure. Suddenly I'm making everything brighter. If I bring it down, I can darken the exposure. I can make everything darken. So once again, these adjustments are going to be applied in a non-destructive way. You can come back, you can make changes, you can drag them below certain things so they're not affecting everything. Now I have it so it's just affecting the background. So I can come in here, I can drag this down and just affect the background. So really cool things you can do. Again, I'm not going to go over all the adjustments in this lesson because that'll be a different one, but I just wanted you to see how layers are tied to everything. Where you put things in the layer order. Are things grouped together? Are we using these non-destructive filters? Are we using blending modes? What's the layer opacity? All sorts of things, all tied to layers. Okay, we are almost done. Let me just discuss a few more quick things so that you get a really thorough education here about layers. So on the bottom here, the only things we haven't discussed are these four options over here. So if you have any layer selected over here, you can hit the delete key, you can right click and delete it, or you have this little trash can icon here, just another way to delete things. Here's a new pixel layer icon. So if you click on that, it's just going to add a new pixel layer up here. This folder option, this is just for grouping layers. So we've talked about how you can use keyboard shortcuts for that, or select a few things, do that right click and you'll find group also. And then the last option here is called container layer. Basically what a container layer is, I'm not going to go over it in depth, but basically this is like adding a clipping mask, except you're using a vector shape. So you have to do this with a vector shape. And then anything below that's in that container will get clipped by that layer. So it's basically like a clipping mask, except you're doing it on the group level. So if you had a group up here, like we have a group up here, it's basically like adding a mask to a group. The one advantage of this over adding a mask to a group at the group layer is if you come in here and you move a traditional mask like this. So let me just show you. If I grab this and I move this, we'll see how we start to get this hard edge. And that's because if you move a mask layer, so let's just use that alt click trick to look at the mask itself, then you'll start to get this white edge or black edge, depending on how you're working with your mask. And so you can get that hard edge. If you're just moving a vector shape and that's the clipping shape, then you're not going to have this problem. So it does have a slight advantage over just using a mask at a group layer. So that's this container option here, but we're not going to go over that anymore now. So let me just hit Control Z to bring this back so it looks normal again. Now we're almost done. I think we've done a really thorough, good job of covering layers and getting up to speed, but there are 2 more settings I want you to be aware of, 2 more options. So just hang in there for a second. We're going to go over these real quick. So the first is this lock icon in the upper right. Now in a lot of software like Photoshop and older versions of Affinity, when you click this on, it would lock that layer. You couldn't rename it, you couldn't move it, you couldn't paint on it. However, if I click on this tiger right now, I can still double click in and change that name if I wanted to. I can still drag it around, move it below other layers down here. And I actually can come in here and I can still, you take a paintbrush and I can still paint on it. Now I'm going to hit Control Z to undo these changes I just made. But what I want to point out to you is from what I've researched and what I found out, the first thing said, well, you can paint on it, do those things, but it locks it in the layer position. Well, no, it doesn't. We just moved it. So from what I've read, this is sort of still a bug where this icon may sometimes work on embedded documents and things like that, but it is not currently working the way it traditionally does in a program like this. So stay tuned on that. There may be changes coming on that, but at least right now when I'm testing this lock icon is basically cosmetic. It's not really doing anything, at least not for most layers in here. Now maybe for some layers, embedded layers, certain layers, it might do something, but right now that's not performing the way we would expect it to. So just be aware of that. There isn't a way to really protect layers in here, so you got to pay attention to what you're doing. Now the last thing we're going to talk about is this settings icon here. This is a little bit more complicated, but if we really delve into it, it's actually a simple concept. So I'm going to go over it real quickly. It may take a longer video to go over it thoroughly, but we're going to go over it real quickly just so you have a sense for what this blend options feature does up here, because it's actually really powerful. So to help us understand this better, I'm going to go up to my top layer and then I'll just create a new layer above everything. And then I'm going to come over here and grab my fill tool here, and I'm going to fill with a radial gradient. So I'm going to select radial here. And then I want to come in and adjust this so it goes from white to black. So it's set to white there. Let's set this other point to black so I can come in here and adjust this color. And then what I can do is come in here and drag out this radial gradient that goes from white in the center all the way out to black at the edges. We're going to use this to understand how this blend options works up here, because what you can do is you can blend layers based on brightness values. And you can either blend the top layer or you can blend the layer underneath. So this top layer, if I want to blend sort of the bright values, what you have to understand is what you're looking at here is this sort of chart from left to right represents the darkest most parts of your image on the left all the way over to the brightest parts of your image on the right. So this would be pure black, this would be white, and then everything in between here. Now, if you talk about the top of the slider, and you can see that these points now are both set at the top of the slider, that means we're showing everything. We're going to show everything. But the farther we drag that down here, the more we're hiding something. So at the very bottom, that's hide everything. Show everything, hide everything, and then of course these are all levels of transparency in between. So if we're at the 50% point, then we would be 50% showing this. So if I drag this down, suddenly we're taking those darkest layers and we're saying, okay, we're only going to show them 50%. And now we're going to take the brightest parts of the image. Let's drag that down to 50%. And now we see that we're sort of just seeing 50% of that image on screen. If I wanted to hide it completely, I could drag both of these all the way down. Now, what if we just want to hide sort of the black parts here? Well, that's the left side of our image, right? So you can come in here and you can add step points. So maybe I'll put a point here, then I'm going to take this slider, I'm going to drag it all the way down, I'll put another point. Now suddenly look, we're hiding the darkest parts of that image. If we want to increase the range of that, I can drag this over and we're hiding more and more of those darkest parts of the image. Now if I wanted to hide the white here and sort of make a donut shape, I could put another step point over here and I could drag that down. Let's add another step point here. And so you can start to figure out ways you can adjust this curve, and then suddenly you can make these very interesting shapes. I need one more here. Actually, let me bring it over and then let me use another one here, because what we're going to do is do a stepwise thing like this. So now we sort of have this donut type cutout. So this does take practice, but if you start to just think logically about this, where black is represented by the leftmost side, white on the right, and then everything in between in terms of brightness values, and then the bottom of the curve, when you drag points down, you're hiding more and more. If you have a slider point up here, then you're showing everything in that tonal range. Now, let me go ahead and reset this. You can have it operate on the background layer below, whatever's directly behind the image you have highlighted here. So right now, if we look directly behind this circle is turned off, so this tiger layer is actually what's directly behind this now. So let me just slide this a little to the right so we can see our tiger a little better. Imagine maybe you were trying to have his stripes, the darkest parts of him show through. You're trying to create some sort of line art type look or something. Well, we could blend the bottom layer, which is the tiger layer, and have it show through in just the darkest places on that bottom layer. So let me just turn this back on so we can see what we're doing here. Now remember, I'm going to now operate on the underlying image, and I'm basically telling it I want to bring through those darkest areas. Now, because I'm working on the underlying layer here, I have to sort of drag things down on the curve. So it's sort of working the inverse of this one. Before, it's like at the bottom I was hiding things. Now at the bottom I'm sort of showing this tonal range. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to grab stuff from the bottom and I'm going to drag over like this because now I want to show these darkest areas, have them show through. So I'm setting up this little stepwise curve and look at how we're bringing that back now. That's showing through our topmost layer. So this just gives you a lot of control when it comes to blending images, and you can get some really interesting effects. Now there are times when this is more complicated than you need, because you can just come up here, use this drop down and use one of these traditional blending options, these blending presets, but it is another option for advanced control in situations where these presets do not get the job done. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Thanks for sticking it out here until the end. I know this was one of the longer videos in this series, but I really do believe that layers are foundational if you really do want to become an efficient Affinity user. Now, of course, if you like this video, feel free to like and subscribe to this channel. And I also have an email newsletter that I'll send out periodically with updates about Canva, about Affinity. So if you're interested in that as well, I can post a link to that down in the first pinned comment. Thanks again for watching. Have a great day. See you soon.
Everything I do so instinctive and so passionate. Every word I move so descriptive like an adjective. I got a vendetta against people who patented being negative when you should be getting after it. I got facts over tracks, this and that. Spitting slow, spitting fast. I could roast, I could gas. Think I'm okay at last, but I don't know if that can erase all the